Good afternoon and welcome. While we're waiting for a few more to come in, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and where you're from or the agency you represent, we'd love to have you put that in the room chat. That's where we can communicate with one another. I'm Maria Bynum, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. And I smile about that because I think I better keep my day job. I may not be as adept at this, but we're going to give it our best shot. And we have some great panelists today. So why don't we get started? I see a few more coming in. Well, again, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, The Pandemic Spotlights Housing Insecurities, Planning a Path Forward, a Call to Action. Again, I'm Maria Bynum. I'm the Field Office Director for the Wilmington HUD office. And as I said, I'll be your moderator for this session. And I just wanted to wish you a happy Women's History Month and also happy St. Patty's Day. So we're glad as this conference has unfolded a lot of great opportunities and sessions, and we just appreciate that you took your time to join us when there were so many other great options during this time frame. So now before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Everyone's mics are muted except for the panelist. And we would like to say, if you have any questions as we go through the program, that you put it in the question and answer chat so that we can try to respond to those at the end of the panel presentation. And just so you know, we are recording this. Now to introduce our panelists for the day. I'd like to introduce you to Carrie Casey. She is the General Manager for Newcastle County. Welcome, Carrie. And we have Marlena Gibson, who is the Director of Policy and Planning for the Delaware State Housing Authority. We welcome you, Marlena. And Brandy Nauman, the Director of Community Development and Housing for Sussex County. We say welcome to Brandy as well. Before I turn the floor over to our presenters today, I would like to just set the stage for our panelists so that they can share what they're doing locally to address housing insecurities in their respective areas. I'm going to remove the gallery view so that you can have a full view of our PowerPoint presentations. It's a little hard to believe that just 2 years ago this month, the COVID-19 pandemic dramatically changed life in Delaware and across the nation, across the globe, turned it upside down. I was sent home to work. Restaurants and businesses shut down. Homeless individuals found shelters, had limited beds to deter the spread of COVID-19. And certainly, we don't ever want to forget so many of our friends, associates, family members, and people in our community lost loved ones. In keeping with our topic today, the pandemic spotlights housing insecurities, we know that the pandemic exacerbated the nation's already severe housing affordability crisis and added to the challenges faced by people experiencing homelessness and the providers that serve them. Every person deserves to have a safe, decent, and affordable home. No one should have to die in the cold alone, or in the street, or in a car. We remembered the homeless who died in Delaware in 2021 at a memorial service in Dover in December. It's an annual event, but as you might expect, we weren't able to do that last year or the year before, because of the pandemic. Housing Alliance Delaware coordinates a point-in-time count every year. Volunteers walk the streets and survey those living in encampments or in outdoor locations, in addition to those who spend the coldest nights in Code Purple shelters across Delaware. during one night in January, and this year we did it in February because of the pandemic, volunteer teams span out across Delaware to count those who are homeless and record their current circumstance. On the following day, we visit places the homeless gather, like libraries, to count those we might have missed during the night survey. That information is used with other factors to determine funding that the state's continuum of care receives to house the homeless and provide the supportive services they need through providers across the state. Just this week, HUD announced that Delaware is receiving $8.9 million to fund projects designed to shelter the homeless and help them again get the supportive services they need. And the goal is getting them into permanent housing. The pandemic has shone a light on the homelessness crisis and housing insecurity. Rents are rising here in Delaware. This was a headline on the front page of the News Journal just a few short weeks ago. The article said Delaware had the highest increase in residential rent in the country from 2019 to 2021, and that was according to a survey by the online insurance marketplace, Quote Wizard, a lending tree company. The article stated that Delaware's average rent for a one-bedroom apartment jumped 12.3% to $1,142, according to Quote Wizard's March 2021 report. Well, I wasn't so familiar with that organization, so I thought I'd check those details. And HUD releases a regional housing market report. The Office of Policy Development and Research for HUD issues that quarterly, and the latest one just happened to come out this week. And it did say that rents increased in Dover by 13% to $1,411, up from $1,244 during the same time period in 2020. Apartment vacancy rates decreased as rents increased, leaving renters behind on lease payments. If we step back and take a look nationally at HUD's analysis of Census Household Pulse Survey data that was collected between December 29, 2021 and January 10, 2022, it shows that nationally, approximately more than 6.7 million renter households were behind on rental payments. On average, renter households were a little more than 2 months behind on their payments, and 11% were more than 6 months behind. An estimated 12.5% of renter households were not at all confident in their ability to pay their rent on time, and 7.1%, or 3.17 million renter households, feared eviction was imminent in the next 2 months. Now, if we focus back here in Delaware, home sales increased at a fast pace in Delaware, climbing 7%. Strong demand, compounded by continued declines in the inventory of homes for sale and low mortgage interest rates, made for tight market conditions. Home building slowed in Delaware due to rising prices of building materials. So the number of single-family homes permitted in Delaware declined by 500 homes. So we can see that the pandemic had a major impact for our communities as it relates to rental and home ownership opportunities. And I think we all agree, one homeless person is one too many. Well, the American Rescue Plan came to our rescue. Governor Carney announced investment plans for $925 million in funds that came to the first state. Through the American Rescue Plan, communities now have historic resources to help individuals and families to address housing insecurities and urgent COVID-19 related needs. And for HUD, it's not just enough to provide the funds to states and localities. HUD is offering technical assistance to help build capacity and to utilize the resources most efficiently and effectively. You see before you some of the things that the funding through HUD is helping to address. HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge is calling an all-hands-on-deck effort to address the nation's homelessness crisis using some of these resources in Delaware. 120 emergency housing vouchers that the Wilmington, Newcastle, and Delaware State Housing Authorities can be used to assist persons and families that are homeless, those at risk of homelessness, those attempting to flee domestic violence, those who are formerly incarcerated, or those who just have a high risk of housing instability. Once those are used, the housing authorities can request additional emergency housing vouchers. More than $11 million in Home Investment Partnerships Program funding comes through HUD to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability. Communities with citizen participation input are currently submitting plans on how they plan to spend those funds. And these funds are considered the avenue for increasing affordable housing units and services. Now, Secretary Fudge in September announced this bold initiative called House America, and it calls for local elected officials to sign on to this initiative and develop goals to rehouse the homeless and to create new affordable units in the development pipeline by the end of the year, this year. The units don't need to be built by the end of the year, just the goals and the plans need to be in place. Secretary Fudge identified these two resources, the emergency housing vouchers, which we talked about, and the home ARP funds, and any other resources in a community's toolbox to accomplish the goal setting and delivery plan. Also under ARP, more than $200 million in emergency rental assistance program funds from the Treasury Department come to Delaware to help keep folks in their homes. HUD stands by to provide technical assistance to help those communities trying to use those funds. A lot of money for someone to try to get out the door and to reach those most in need. Communities are using the ARP funds, the traditional HUD funding they receive, and other funding streams to address the challenges of homelessness and affordable housing. There are countless public service superstars like our attendees, you, who are joining us today, that are doing their part to help the homeless and to create affordable housing. And here on the screen, we wanted to give a salute to Dr. Sandra Gibney. She was just named one of USA Today's Women of the Year. She's done some amazing work to vaccinate our homeless and the most vulnerable among us. And again, we salute her today because she kind of demonstrates the conference title, Public Superstars, Care and Compassion for Our Communities and Our Workforce. I think she certainly stands for that. And today I have the pleasure of sharing three of my favorite public service superstars, our panelists, and I will share their photos again. Carrie Casey, General Manager for Newcastle County, who will start us off. She will be followed by Marlena Gibson, Director of Policy and Planning for Delaware State Housing Authority. And then Brandy Nauman, Director of Community Planning and Housing for Sussex County, will complete our panel presentations. And so I will turn the mic over to you, Carrie.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Maria, so much for your wonderful introduction and all the work that you do as our HUD liaison in the state of Delaware. You are a true partner and just a wonderful overall human being. And I'd also like to give just, some accolades to my colleagues, Marlena and Brandy. We work so closely together. And it's really wonderful to see such wonderful, caring women in leadership roles in government. So just glad to be here. Maria really did a great job of laying out the foundation of what Delaware was seeing and what we're still seeing in terms of what some really stark issues with housing that really the pandemic really laid bare. And we can talk about this, and we can, just really think about it. But I also, and I'm sure Brandy and Marlena will agree, we've seen some really awesome opportunities to innovate, to try to address some of the challenges of housing insecurity in our state. So I'm going to give you the perspective of some things we did in Newcastle County, and then, pass it on to Marlena. But COVID, we're coming out of 2 years of this, has been incredibly challenging for all of us. And if there is one bright spot, it is the fact that as governments, we've worked very closely together to serve the most vulnerable, we've really seen the most vulnerable in our community, more than I think we've ever seen the most vulnerable before. So that, to me, is the small little bright spot of COVID-19. So just to give you some foundation, and I'm going to specifically talk about Newcastle County. So what was homelessness like before COVID-19 for people? And honestly, it wasn't great. In Newcastle County, Maria referenced the point in time. Our point in time count showed about 665 people in Newcastle County, about 1,000 total in the state, were homeless on any given night in our county. Okay, so for them to access shelter, they were required to call daily until a shelter bed became available. Some shelters, at least some of the shelters in Newcastle County, have limited hours and are only open from like 5 p.m. to 6 a.m. So individuals who were living in shelter, many had to leave shelter with their belongings and come back in the afternoon. So daytime access was limited to day centers. There's some wonderful day centers in our county, libraries, which the county operates, which we're very proud to do, as well as outdoor public spaces and coffee shops. In winter, now this is the case of Newcastle County, not necessarily Kent and Sussex County, code purple. So when it gets below 20 degrees, we would open, Newcastle County would open, Salvation Army would open for people to come in out of the cold when it was below 20 degrees. So if it was 30 degrees and windy and cold, that winter shelter was not opening. So many individuals remained unsheltered, sleeping outside in cars and other places. So it really wasn't the most opportune, wonderful situation for people experiencing homelessness. And if you can remember, back in February of 2020, this is before COVID, which seems about 300 years ago, where there were 3 people that were found dead in a tent behind the Walgreens near Delaware Park, if you're familiar. And people, this was a call to action. People shouldn't use propane. People shouldn't have to use propane. They died of carbon monoxide poisoning. It was a call to action at that time. However, we weren't really able to do that much. So then we go into what happened on March 13th, 2020, which was almost 2 years ago. So when the state shut down, and I like to really say, it's really hard to shelter in place if you don't have shelter, right? Emergency shelters were stepping up huge, but they were also concerned about big open congregating spaces. So they had to really diminish the amount of people they were allowing in their shelter. Libraries, county libraries, state libraries, everything closed, coffee shops closed, day centers closed, okay? Newcastle County, this is how basic it got back then. We funded some porta potties and hand washing stations so folks who were unsheltered at least had access to keeping their hands clean during a public health emergency. The governor, to his credit, largely, Marlena and Brandy, we, really all working together, created these homeless outreach teams around the end of March, and began to do risk assessments on those individuals. Dr. Gibney was part of that actually too. So if folks were vulnerable, elderly, had an underlying health condition, they were placed in hotels. And that initial mobility, about 2,500 people were assessed, and that initial mobility really led to the expansion of the motel voucher program, which was a strategic partnership between all of the jurisdictions, Delaware State Housing Authority, City of Wilmington, City of Newark, City of Dover, to fund the state's motel voucher program. So we could put as many people as we could into motel rooms, because guess what? Having your own room and your own bathroom was really the safest place to be housed during a public health emergency. So we all put a lot of our HUD CARES Act money into funding one motel voucher program, which was the state's. So that happened around April, May of 2020, but that then winter started to come. And we formed a winter working group to try to figure out what people should do. And we did not have enough motel rooms to address the number of people that were experiencing homelessness at that time. There were about 100 people that were calling for shelter that weren't able to access around that time. So here we go. There she is, the beautiful Sheraton Wilmington South, which is located right on the highway. Newcastle County had received a large amount of CARES Act funding. They were under a deadline, and we had made a group that had worked on this committee to serve the most vulnerable back in July of 2020, looked at what other jurisdictions were doing and said at that time we should buy a hotel. And at that time in July, there were no hotels available. And then we saw this article on September 12, 2020, saying that this beautiful renovated hotel was headed for auction. Newcastle County took some real discussions. It took a full meeting of county council, but the approval was given 13-0. So that's Newcastle County Council barely ever agrees to do something unanimously. 13-0, they agreed that the county should bid on this property to house folks experiencing homelessness during COVID-19. I still sometimes have to pinch myself that actually happened. We were the winning bidder. We purchased the hotel on December 1st, 2020. Was winter. We were like, we could have taken a year to figure out what to do, but we knew it was winter and we knew there were people needing shelter. So we opened it as the Hope Center on December 15th, 2020. Our motto was, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And it was a little messy at times, but the first group was 73 street level homeless on December 15th. And then we began to take motel voucher referrals on December 29th. And so this is where, let's see, did I miss the slide? Okay, no, I didn't. So the Hope Center is really, really making a difference. We've housed over 1,000 people since we opened on December 15th, 2020. We have families from all over the state. Our third largest school district is Capital School District. We have 400 plus people there. We've had about 400 plus people there since September. At about 85% occupied. And we also have had about 200 of those are children. We've had 14 babies there. We have the presidential suite is a Christiana Care satellite office. The state of Delaware, again, partnerships, people working together, put a mental health clinic on the second floor. The city of Newark, the city of Wilmington helped fund us, and the motel voucher program from the state helps fund the rooms. So there it is. It's the Hope Center. If you drive on 95, we have a sign up now that says the Hope Center, and it really is just an unbelievable project. And if you're ever in the area, I would love to give any of you all a tour. So our focus on the Hope Center is exits. So this is from about the end of December. We've had 102 households move on to permanent housing. So it's really all about wraparound case management. We use a lot of our HUD money for that. And we're currently at about 125 households. Close to 300 people have moved into permanent housing. And some of these folks, like this lady in the corner, had been chronically homeless for 30 years. So the fact that she is now in permanent housing makes this, I think, the whole project really worth it. So what we noticed, and Maria talked about this too, is we have a lot of folks at the Hope Center that are unable to access housing at all due to the fact that there is such a tight affordable rental housing crisis in the state and specifically in Newcastle County. Here are some of those facts. Maria again talked about them as well, but we are seeing an absolute lack of housing for people. And if you have a credit or any kind of judgment against you, you really are not going to be able to find safe, decent, and affordable housing in Newcastle County. Just anecdotally, we run a Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher program. Right now, only 37% of our clients are able to secure housing in Newcastle County, even with a subsidy, which is really, really challenging. The impact of that is that we're seeing an increase in homelessness. Now, it's interesting. We saw from year to 2021 a 35% increase in homelessness. That is really attributed to people, to families, and not necessarily more families, but families unable to access a permanent housing. They're staying longer in shelter, which is really concerning because we want these families to be stabilized. And if they're not able to access housing, then they're going to continue in this emergency shelter kind of circle, which is not healthy, especially for children. Many households also live in substandard, unhealthy housing, and this disproportionately impacts people of color. 70% of all evictions in our state were filed against people of color before the pandemic, and Black households are 4 times more likely to experience homelessness than white counterparts. This is a really serious issue. It's not just the lack of housing, it's how it disproportionately affects people of color. So one of the things that the county executive, and Maria mentioned the ARPA funding, one of the things that the county executive and county council have proposed is the creation of a Newcastle County Affordable Housing Fund. So this is where we're trying to address this shortage of affordable housing. In a normal year, we get about $1 million in HUD funding for affordable housing. This year, we actually have created a fund that has a little over $32 million in it. We are asking for people to submit innovative projects. We're focusing outside of Newcastle, the city of Wilmington. We're trying to create more housing outside of the city of Wilmington where there's a concentration of that housing. So the money is not just coming from ARPA, it's also coming from some previous CARES Act housing money that we have, as well as some other non-federal funding sources. So our first round of funding, and here who's eligible to apply: nonprofit, for-profit developers, community-based organizations. And again, I think the biggest thing we learn is that let's just try this and see how it works. Our first round was February 24th, and we got 14 applications. So we have a rolling application deadline going forward. And we hope to get some really good projects. We're seeing some really good projects to really create. I think our goal is close to, we're hoping to create a goal that will give us a couple hundred new units of affordable housing. Some of the eligible costs, what you think: new construction, rehab, preservation, acquisition, real just creation type things, not operating. So that can be challenging. So that's one of the things that we're working through is how can people operate affordable housing? If it's subsidized, because we really want to target folks that are experiencing homelessness or coming out of homelessness or at risk of being homeless. So Maria also mentioned Newcastle County, and hopefully the rest of the jurisdictions will sign up. But we recently signed up to become part of the House America Initiative. We joined other cities like Boston. We are one of the first counties. So this will really help us as we put out this huge fund. We want to see what we're going to get, but this allows us to create some metrics so we can set a target for how, on 2 fronts, how we're going to create more housing and then how we're going to rehouse folks. So one part is sort of creation, building. The other is around some of the other supportive case management programs that help people experiencing homelessness come out of homelessness. So we're very excited. We're the first jurisdiction in Delaware to sign on, and we're working with our partners to establish those targets. So we're not blindly out there kind of shooting in the dark on what we think we're going to be able to create as we go forward. So that is me. I'm going to now turn it over to Marlena, and I really thank you all, and again encourage you, if you're ever in the area, to come and visit. I'd love to give you a tour of the Hope Center. So thank you.
And I will second. It is a great place to go and visit and very inspirational. I think I always say with my kids, they're like, we can do hard things. And the Hope Center is a great example of being able to do hard things. I'm Marlena Gibson. I'm with the Delaware State Housing Authority, and in between these 2 great presentations about some local government initiatives, I will zoom in on one specific area that's been really kind of dominant for DSHA during COVID, and I know has kind of filled my life for the last almost 2 years, which is our Delaware Housing Assistance Program, our emergency rental assistance. Before digging into that program some more, I do want to start with a little bit of background just about DSHA and what we do. So DSHA is the State Housing Finance Agency. So primarily our role is financing housing. We finance affordable rental housing, below market rate mortgages, down payment settlement assistance. We fund some programs like homelessness assistance. And then in community development, we administer the Downtown Development District Rebate Program and the Strong Neighborhoods Housing Fund and a few other community development oriented programs. So really kind of everything all the way through from, you can see, homelessness under rental housing through to foreclosure prevention and rehab assistance for existing homeowners. Anything covered under housing, we usually have something going on. A lot of that is through our partners, not necessarily programs that we kind of directly operate, which is an interesting thing about our experience with this emergency rental assistance. I think one of the most immediate impacts for COVID was on the rental market, and dramatic as well. And I pulled this date just to like give myself the shock of like how quickly we did this and launched this program, which was March 26th, 2020. And I think when kind of the initial shutdowns happened, so many people who relied on a paycheck, folks who don't have vacation time, don't have sick time, all the households that we've always talked about in the housing world as being kind of one paycheck away from homelessness or financial disaster, folks who are really kind of living on the edge, paycheck to paycheck. All of a sudden, that happened to thousands of households all at once, didn't get paychecks. And that was incredibly, I think, dramatic. And we saw that initial need, and very early on put together the Delaware Housing Assistance Program, knowing that we would need to be kind of fixing it as we went, but also not thinking that it would be something we would be doing for 2 years, and that would grow to the tune of well over $50 million. But we launched that program with some kind of cobbled together state and local resources in late March of 2020. And it has gone through several kind of iterations along the way. I would add it's kind of in the context of the housing market. So I think all along this time, I think we've been working to adjust it as we go, both to kind of changing funding guidelines, changing needs, changing policy environment as things around like eviction moratoriums and what processes the courts are using are changing along the way. The first version of the program ran from about March to August of 2020, only offered up to $2,000 of assistance, which was actually more than kind of typical for these types of programs that existed before. And assisted about 1,300 households. Then there was a second version in the second half of 2020 that was able to do up to 8,000 and helped about 3,000 households. There was some significant new federal funding that was put towards emergency rental assistance kind of at the very tail end of 2020. And that was a really huge allocation to Delaware. So we went from kind of cobbling together piecemeal things to suddenly having a massive allocation coming our way, realizing that we're now looking at multi-year programs, that this is going to be something lasting for a long time. So all the things that we do when we're standing up new programs, we're kind of doing at each step of this, kind of new software systems, everything related to standing up something that didn't really exist before. And went through another significant change in August of last year, added quite a few new program features. And I want to hone in on the like didn't exist before part, because I think I know for me, even working in housing, evictions was not something that kind of came up every day. I think it was a kind of we saw it kind of related to homelessness, but it was not nearly the topic that I think it is now. We didn't nearly have the understanding of the impact of evictions. I think frequently in Delaware, they were often used as a rent collection tool. It's not very expensive to file for eviction in Delaware. Most often evictions are filed for pretty low amounts, like less than $2,000, sometimes significantly less than that. And program-wise, like flipping back here, I would say our work around evictions was pretty limited under this little homelessness bubble there. And we had recently started funding kind of a pilot project on legal services for eviction prevention in probably 2019, maybe. And we had some funding similar to DHAP, but like to the tune of a couple $100,000 that was administered by nonprofit agencies that would be cutting a check for $1,000, $1,500 to help bring people current on their rent. So this really was something that didn't exist before, not in Delaware, and I think in most states. This was not something that kind of existed in this way, partially because I think we never really had the resources for it, and also weren't thinking about it in that same way. The same way that I think COVID heightened our understanding and attention to homelessness so much. That's also been the case around evictions. I think it's still pretty hard to find data about homelessness, but about eviction. But at the time and kind of pre-COVID, you would not see a lot about evictions in the news. There really isn't even much data about it to know how many evictions there are. It just was not something nearly at the kind of heightened attention that it grew to have. So I will cover a little bit about the program itself, partially because I want to make sure to kind of spread that word. And if there are people you know of who might benefit from it, or if you can, in your roles, do anything to help spread the word. Who's eligible? There are 4 key federal eligibility requirements. One is that one or more individuals in the household must have qualified for unemployment or had a reduction in income. They must have a risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability, and income below 80% of area median income. And the last one, which isn't up here because it's pretty obvious, is they must be a renter household. And so most of those things are documented via self-attestation in our application portal. So earlier versions of the program, examples of things we learned along the way, like the first version of the program, we required documentation of impact from COVID-19 on your income. Needed to see like reduced pay stubs, a layoff notice, documentation that you were receiving unemployment. And that proved just too cumbersome over time. And I think nationally that has been the trend to move more towards self-attestation on a lot of these eligibility items wherever we can. So what can the program cover? It can cover past due rent from April 1st, 2020 to present for up to 15 months and up to $2,000 a month. It can also cover future rent up to 3 months at a time. So like right now, if a case is approved right now, it would, and it was requested, we would also be paying rent for April, May, and June. We can cover utilities that were owed to the landlord, those would be included with the rent, or also utilities that are owed directly to the utility company, if that's sewer, water, electric, or gas. And also fees, if there are court fees or other things like that, as long as they're stated in the lease and they're listed on the ledger, we can include those. Manufactured homes on leased land are covered. Also, subsidized units and tenants with rental assistance can get help with the tenant portion of their rent. Room rental, and another thing that we added in August of last year was security deposits in first 3 months rent. So we can help folks who are moving into a new unit. I think we are finding, and I think other grantees are finding this too, that usually takes a little more attention, a little more kind of hand-holding to get the application through, get the landlord fully on board. But we do have the ability to fund that now. To apply, we have an online application portal that can visit through our website, which I just realized I didn't actually put the website here. I have it later, but it's decovidhousinghelp.com. It's a very straightforward application. There are 2 sides for the tenant and the landlord, and the documentation required is really minimal, and there are a lot of alternative options. So even tenants who maybe don't have a lease because it's, they've been in the same place for 15 years and never had one or lost it, there are alternative documentation for that. If folks don't have a driver's license, there's other documentation alternatives. So really have tried to make this as flexible and workable as possible. The basic requirements are a lease, ID and or proof of residency, some sort of income documentation, which can include just self-certification of income, and then the self-attestation for COVID-19 related financial hardship. And so that's just an e-signature thing that folks do in the portal as they're submitting the application. For the landlord side, they need to provide us a W-9 and a ledger or past due rent statement. And if landlords choose not to participate, we can make payment to the tenant. There's some required outreach steps. We want to make sure that that's the right thing to do, but that is an option. Otherwise, payment is made directly to the landlord. That is not happening very often, but it is an option. And folks who might need help submitting an application, we have about 15 organizations who are available to provide application assistance. We recently expanded that quite a bit. They're all listed on the program website and can provide help in a lot of different situations. All applications do have to be submitted in the portal. That's to keep it manageable and functional. In one of the earlier versions, we did take paper applications, and that just did not work well in the end. We weren't serving those applicants well by accepting that paper application. Having help for them to submit an application in the portal, it was what was most useful. So that help is available. Folks can either be kind of walked through submitting an application on their own, or a tenant representative can submit it for them. As a whole, our impact, I'm always surprised when I come back and look at this number of how much we've gotten out in this assistance in the last 2 years. In our first 2 rounds of funding, that was about $15 million. So the maximum was a lot lower then. In the third kind of through now version of the program, the maximum assistance obviously is a lot higher. We can do 15 months. And like I said, we have a pretty significant allocation available. We've put out about $59 million in the last 12 months through that newest version of the program. A little bit about kind of who we're serving, and a little bit more detail about that. The average amount of assistance is about $6,800. So the spending $59 million, like $6,000 at a time, is the challenging part. We've helped, it comes out to about 7,500 households. Cases, we can do more than one case per household. So the 8,677 number there is not necessarily households. A household can come back and get additional assistance. Say they have past due rent, they apply, get that's processed and paid. They come back and have a utility bill. They can submit a new case and get that utility bill paid. Or find they still need help with the rent. If they're not at the max, they can come back and do another request for another 3 months of rental assistance. The average months in arrears is about 5 months. I will say, I think what we are seeing, we've been seeing the kind of trend in applications change over time, I would say. In 2020, we were definitely seeing more very large requests. People were very far behind. There was a lot kind of constantly changing in the eviction landscape. Both there were federal moratoriums and state. There was the state of emergency applied to evictions as well. So I think we are seeing smaller requests now, and definitely a lot more recertifications until folks get up to that 15 months. Our average household income about $18,000, and average household size about 2.5. Some of the impact on evictions, I am always shocked when I look at this information, because like I said, we didn't talk about evictions, I feel like, all that much before COVID, but there actually were, before COVID, typically around 18,000 eviction filings a year in Delaware. And I think following the news and the press coverage, and with that greater kind of understanding of the problem of evictions, the intense trauma of evictions as well for people who are going through it, even if it's not carried out, just going through the filing and the court hearing and the notices is very traumatic. But in reality, that number has actually been significantly less during COVID and since COVID for a lot of reasons. I think the $60 million in rental assistance has definitely helped, but there also have been a lot of, like I said, policy changes over time. There were some significant chunks of time where eviction filings were pretty strictly restricted. And then even after landlords were able to file again, there were pretty strict restrictions on carrying out evictions. So they might file, but not all the way, get all the way through to removing the household from the unit. Some more recent data looking at 2019 compared to 2021. And so this is a rolling 30 days. So that doesn't mean that like there were 500 cases submitted in that week. It's the rolling 30-day total. And looking at 2019 against 2021, you can see 2019 up there around 1,500 up to 2,000 every 30 days. And through most of 2021, around 500, creeping back up closer to 1,000. But as a whole, filings have been about half of what they were pre-COVID in Delaware. I think one thing I'm really excited about moving forward for this work, and it since it has been, it's been really new. This is a new program. It's under a much broader umbrella of housing stabilization. So we're also supporting legal services. We're supporting housing stability services to help stabilize households. Is, I'm hoping, a kind of new aspect of affordable housing work moving forward, and hopefully policy change as well. I think one of the outcomes from the foreclosure crisis was significant changes to the foreclosure process in the state, for example, were made at that time. There was a automatic residential mortgage mediation program that was added to the foreclosure process, kind of adding additional protection for homeowners that survived that crisis. And there were financial assistance programs for homeowners facing foreclosure that survived that crisis and that still exist, and we're reviving now to help homeowners in the current situation. And I think this experience on rental assistance and evictions issues, I'm really hopeful will have that kind of ongoing effect in the area of rental assistance and evictions, and hopefully being able to keep households more stable long term. And with that, I think that, one last slide, which was a couple of resources that I wanted to share related to DSHA, just for kind of your knowledge and your work and your families and your lives. The first is the decovidhousinghelp.com. That's the main site for the DHAP program. So the kind of apply today link, that's how to get to the portal and all the program information. Another is Kiss Your Landlord Goodbye. That's our kind of primary landing page for all of DSHA's homeownership programs. So folks who are interested in pursuing homeownership want to understand what kind of assistance is available, find a housing counselor, all those kinds of things. That's the place to go. And then lastly, DelawareHousingSearch.org, which is a collaborative site that a lot of our partners support, including Newcastle and Sussex County, and I'm pretty sure Kent County too, all support this site. Also some of the other public housing authorities. It is an affordable rental housing locator service. It's not limited to affordable housing. Anyone can use it. It's open for landlords and for tenants to search for housing. And it's an excellent resource. So we're always working to get the word out about that as well. With that, I will turn it to Brandy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Brandy Nauman with Sussex County Community Development and Housing, and I am very honored to be amongst these three superstars. I love these ladies. So I'm going to go just to discuss what's been going on. No, I can't move forward. Let's see. Hold on one second. I can't seem to
Brandy,
move forward.
I can try to move it. Let me see.
No. Okay. Yes, thanks. So just to give you an overview of what's happening in Sussex County right now, Maria and Carrie and Marlena have sort of given an overview of the state already as it is, but Sussex County is, even though the pandemic has been hitting us the last 2 years, we have been slammed with a construction boom and development. And so, and if you just see the calendar year 2020 to calendar year 2021, we have significant development going on, 26 major subdivision applications last year, 28 in 2021, and over 15,000 new dwelling units I'm sorry, 5,300 new dwelling units were approved last year. And next slide, you too. And I can kind of graze over this, but Sussex County obviously is really highly dependent on tourist and service industries. So these are one of the lowest paying jobs, as well as agribusiness here in Sussex County. Next slide. And just the price of real estate here in Sussex County has shot through the roof in the last couple of years. This is my example of actually my grandmother's home in downtown Lewis that she was raised in was recently listed at $1.1 million, which is just crazy to think about. We can keep on moving to get to this was touched on as well, but rents have risen so dramatically. I wanted to give a little bit of a snapshot of the county. We have pretty distinct east versus west. We are almost seen as two separate counties here, but Coastal Tide and Lewis, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a bit. A 2-bedroom there in February was listed at $1,695 a month. The Oaks, a new project in Georgetown, was listed at $1,373, and the villages of Stony Brook and Seaford on the west side of the county was listed at $1,295. Next slide. And this just kind of showcases, this was from a study we had done a couple of years ago regarding the housing need and economic feasibility study, that housing and transportation data really showcase that folks are they live on the west side of the county because it's often more affordable to rent and to buy a home. However, any cost savings that are seen from that are lost just because of having to drive east every day to work, and especially now with gas prices the way that they've risen recently. So you can keep going to the next one. We can skip that one too. Obviously a need for affordable rental and low to moderate income for sale housing. We can keep going. So one of the things that Sussex County has started doing is there's been a focus on what we call garage studio apartments, which are basically what you more commonly known as ADUs. And it basically provided we established in 2019 an administrative approval process that would allow folks to just go through our planning and zoning department to seek an ADU for their property. And this allows a much easier route to obtaining one of these. This gives just your everyday homeowner the ability to earn some additional income if they want, obviously, to house an aging family member, perhaps, but also to rent out a small space on their property. It's a pretty nice feature rather than having to go through our Board of Adjustment or planning and zoning process, which involves public hearings. So next slide. So our Sussex County rental program was established back in 2009, but we only had one project that came through at that time. And since then, the market crashed after 2008, 2009, and we had no new applicants. And so a decade later, that project, it was previously known as Arbors of Cottage Jail, finally went under construction this past year. And actually, my colleague just messaged me. We actually have 4 buildings done now as of this. We just learned this. So 4 out of the 6 buildings are constructed. It's a really exciting project. It's right off of Route 1 in Lewis. It's a great location, and we have 26 units there. And the rents you can see are below. Our target is anyone under 80% of their immediate income. 1, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units are all available. And the maximum rent is $815 for the 3-bedroom right now. That's just a little impact statement from one of our coastal tide residents. So I didn't want to have to read that to you. Okay, next one. The Workforce Housing Initiative. This is actually being presented to County Council at the end of March. We already presented an outline to them, but we will be introducing the actual ordinance, or Council will be introducing the ordinance. And this basically will allow by right multifamily housing up to 12 units per acre for applicants that they have to meet certain criteria. You'll see that those the red marks on the map are sort of parcels that would qualify based on our criteria right now. These must be properties that have to be relatively close to transit. They have to be in alignment with our comprehensive plan. So in developing area, coastal area, town centers, that sort of thing. But rather than going through a really burdensome and expensive and NIMBY filled public hearing process, you can just go through an administrative process, and the trade-off is, of course, that you have to have a percentage of workforce housing, what we call workforce housing, but affordable housing component as part of your project. I think what we're recommending is 30% of the project has to be affordable. And there are other design requirements as well as part of that, but we're really excited about this. It hopefully will eliminate some of these really difficult barriers to getting more rental units and more affordable housing here in Sussex County. Next slide. And so this is also really exciting right now. Maria and Carrie and Marlene already discussed the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan money. Sussex County received, I believe, about $45 million in the ARPA funding. And so just last week, Sussex County officially proposed what their plans are for that funding. And Sussex County is devoting roughly 8 or 9 million to low-income efforts as well as affordable housing. So we also recently approved a housing trust fund, but before we even got started, we were able to kind of infuse it with this ARPA funding. So we will be offering $500,000 in grant funding to developers of affordable housing, and this could be for rental, for home ownership, for permanent supportive housing. There would be deed restrictions. There are going to be some other caveats, but it must address those that are below 65% AMI. We'll also have some direct home buyer assistance programs as well, where we will offer down payment and closing cost assistance. Next slide. We have an existing emergency home repair program, which is the bread and butter of our department, really. But we are excited to expand that with ARPA funding, and that will go to households under 300% of the poverty guideline, and it will basically continue to allow us to help households that have no running water, no heat, in need of handicap accessibility. And but we're also going to do some roof replacements and add a weatherization component, which is something we don't normally take on because of the expense. And we will be assisting those, like I mentioned, 300% of the poverty line. Okay, next slide. And the other two components of the ARPA funding from the county will be to assist delinquent homeowners with paying off their property taxes. This is pretty significant. These individuals are unable to take advantage of certain programs and services at the county because of what we have known as the Clean Hands Ordinance. You cannot access these services unless your taxes are current. So ARPA will be paying off property taxes, including school taxes, allowing folks to take advantage of our repair programs as well as tax assistance programs. And the other program available will be the connection fee assistance program. So again, households under 65% AMI will be ARPA will cover the connection fee for connecting to county sewer or water districts. Next slide. I think that might be it. That's it, I think. So just in time, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me. And thank you everyone for your time.
That's exciting stuff. I really appreciate it, ladies. You guys are my sheroes. You really have lived up to the conference theme, Public Superstars, Care and Compassion for your communities and for the workforce that makes up those communities. So this is really great. I see we've gotten so involved. Our time has passed so quickly. Please feel free to reach out to any of these superstars, if I may, at their positions. Newcastle County for Carrie and Brandy Nauman in Sussex County, and Marlena at the Delaware State Housing Authority. And I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'll check real quick to see if there were any questions. None, but there were lots of thank yous and wow, really amazing stuff you guys are doing and terrific hearing about it. So we are excited that we have our attendees and we look forward to working with you. And if you have questions or if there's something we can help you with, we're happy to do that as well. So with that, I'll thank you so much and allow you to get back to the rest of your day.